Hey everybody, Pierre Marvelis here, hoping this finds you all safe and well in this crazy world of ours. On behalf of City Lights booksellers and publishers and the City Lights Foundation, I'd like to welcome you to City Lights Live, our virtual reading series that follows in the footsteps of our in-store calendar during the time of the pandemic. As always, we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral grounds of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area, from where we continue to celebrate the works of authors we know and love with readings, discussions, and forums, moving into the spring of 2022 and hopefully towards a COVID-free era. Before we begin, I would like to send out our love and support to all our Ukrainian friends who've graced our halls in the past. Just want to let you know we're thinking about you, sending much love and positive energy your way. So tonight, we are delighted to have back in the house someone whose work has been near and dear to our hearts here at City Lights for some time now. Please join us in welcoming the fabulous Wayne Koestenbaum, celebrating the publication of the new collection titled Ultramarine. It is the third and final volume of his very groovy trance poem trilogy. It is published by our friends over at Nightboat Books, who publish some really fantastic work. We love them. Hope you'll check out some of their other titles. So a few words about Wayne before we start. Wayne Koestenbaum is a poet, critic, fiction writer, artist, filmmaker, and performer. He has published 22 books, including The Cheerful Scapegoat, Figure It Out, Camp Marmalade, The Anatomy of Harpo Marx, which is actually one of my all-time favorites, also The Queen's Throat, which was nominated for a National Book Critics Circle Award, and many others. His first feature-length film, The Collective, was premiered at UnionDocs in 2021. In 2020, he received an American Academy of Arts and Letters Award in Literature. Yale's Rare Book and Manuscript Library acquired his literary archive in 2019. He is a distinguished professor of English, French, and Comparative Literature at the City University of New York Graduate Center. So joining Wayne tonight is Ronaldo V. Wilson. Professor Wilson is the author of numerous books, including the awesome Virgil Kills, recently out on Nightboat Books, narrative of the life of the brown boy and the white man from University of Pittsburgh, winner of the Kavikanam Prize, also the award-winning Poems of the Black Object from Future Poem Books. Professor Wilson is co-founder of the Black Tooth Collective. He is professor of creative writing and literature at the University of California, Santa Cruz, serving on the core faculty of the Creative Critical PhD program and principal faculty member of the Critical Race and Ethnic Studies program. So before we begin, I would like to remind you, we're going to be posting links in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard with which you may purchase copies of Ultramarine and other books in the series, as well as Professor Wilson's books. We're also going to be hosting a Q&A at the end of the talk. So if you have any questions, comments, and praise, please do post them in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard. So please join us now in giving a warm welcome to Wayne Koestenbaum, Ronaldo V. Wilson. Welcome to City Lights Live, gentlemen.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Are you going to pin us? I think you're going to pin us. That's a technicality. I don't need to be pinned to be happy. I'm happy right now. I'm seeing all these people I love, especially, I must say, Ronaldo, a dear, dear friend and a writer, performer, magic maker, whom I deeply esteem. And I have much more to say on that front. So I'm going to start by reading one or two quick sections from Ultramarine. I'm going to read the first few pages, a section called, a notebook called My Prostate, a Shopping Mall. My Prostate, a Shopping Mall. Good night, New Year. I meant to begin in Barbara's voice, but I'm speaking in my own voice, as Rafe finds. Discussed the allure of cadmium orange at dim sum this morning. Also mentioned caput mortium. Remembered M's low-pitched speaking voice and his Moses hand on mine. Could I have pushed that friendship more resolutely in gay direction? Why did I equate words and genital sensation? I remain uncertain about the function of suppositories. Made a spontaneous mark with a leftover tube of auratic ultramarine. Finger smeared it to create abrupt, punctuating lines. Squeezed Mars violet and Persian rose into crevices where ultramarine remained visible around embroidered green-stained titanium buff. Today, I'm a puce or carmine Barbara, longing to stop at San Jose Smoke Shop to study hypothesized smut. Saint-Saëns concerto, signifying Agamemnon, fed my wish to triangulate with pale, closeted pianist, my hand-picked Count Almaviva, and my private Moses, ineligible for the mount. As a woman, Moses apologized for his girth. The backs of his upper arms, not my property. Young fops reading Edna Ferber's Showboat or Giant don't flash organs to older tourist guys. Small and smooth, my prostate, mistaken for a shopping mall. Dreamt that Liz and Dick in a theater's back row watched a movie. In profile, Liz was not beautiful. Why did Dick seem the loser in this daisy-pied arrangement? Her discovery of my cock began to equal my own apprehension of its rumored existence. Reclaim German citizenship. Develop crush based on his theft. Smittenness founded on Robin Hood's strategy of stealing back my rightful property. Several dead poets chorally eviscerate my tie to pansy riot. Efface ocean and choose field. Encode flow within field. Mother ate tuna and read War and Peace at Stickney's, a circumstance I idolized. Diplomat at Jackie Onassis's book party, Asia Society, mistook me for chicken. Is it ethically fraudulent to teach prison literature? Inviting you to ignite my ignorance. What is third person plural pronoun, they, in Italian? Why can't I remember he or she or it or they? Do Italian speakers leave he or she or it or they unspoken and unspecified? Now I'm going to leap toward the end of the book, which is divided into, I think, 48 of these notebooks, and read you a very brief one. Notebook number 45, which is subtitled Butter-Colored Slacks and Rubber Rum Balls. Melancholy produces doubling and linguistic self-consciousness, step by step toward nonce proof, never gliding. As if Renata Tebaldi and David Cassidy desired mayhem, blowjob and blow up, fracturing the visible. David Cassidy with complications and a wartime detail about your identity. 5 words Alice James uses, not in your customary vocabulary. Tactile reading with eyes as haptic organ. Take a common object, material or immaterial, describe it again. No need to make it literature, just lay it out. Poulenc's halo of petals, voices clarity against suddenly dissonant temporary sweetness you're afraid will engulf you. Sophie Callie's address and email written down here. Tonalities, coronation. Don't tell of a world out there. Focus attention on unspecific, unscrolling consciousness right here. A consciousness of and about objects, but also consciousness itself as pleasure and peril. Overcoming resistance to the process as it unfolds, unaccustomed language taking over. America, an idea hatched and held in Europe. Stein died in 1946. Think of people you know or knew who were alive in 1946. Butter-colored slacks and rubber training pencils. Serenely they chose grave smell, mere grave pansy hauntings. Vertigo of too many nuances. Don't drown in their rapidity. Choose the nuances you love and settle down with them. Lovers know the drawn figure gilded a Berlin loaf of land brought. Consciousness narrows, lubricates unhappy amplitude. Books bulk, killed the kid. Dog humping shipwrecked object or creature. She looked, and thank you are lesbian signs. Ambassadors, door, bores into the lacunae of the and. Hinged intentions not the same as fixed purpose. All is what was left over. Mind performing its record needle, resuscitating the all. Rum balls with powdered sugar, illustrating to the young mouth the sometimes unwelcome nature of a neighborliness we now look back to as sentimental apex, enclosed in rough paper lunch bag. Door-to-door gift of noisy, maybe abusive, loving, proximate, seemingly omniscient matriarch battling her daughter. And we, housed in language, yet standing outside words, watched the husbanded fragment of 1967 or 1972 gradually disappear. We cling to the recollection without valuing it. Nothing returns to us now but the rumor of the fight and the rum balls hovering on the precipice between deliciousness and inedibility. Mrs. S gave us rum balls, among other treats that weren't quite treats, is a more straightforward way to frame the fable. And that's the taste. And now the talk with my beloved friend and ally in unruliness, and ally in the all, I think, Ronaldo.
Thank you, Wayne, for that oral oration of all of the oars connected to the boat, the hinge, the body, the cleft, the pool, the fissure. I'm so moved to hear your work. I mean, we were talking earlier. I should say thank you, Peter, for bringing us together, and City Lights Books, and Wayne for your continued both, I think, diligence as a writer, your kind of delicate strength, and I have a way of thinking of your work in particular ways, but I thought of you as this bare knuckle theorist, like a featherweight boxer. I don't know if it's you in the book, the 121, 128, but I'm like, wow, that guy's like, he's like Mayweather. He's in that kind of fighting class, really incredible. I mean, Wayne was my teacher, continues to be my teacher, but was one of the directors and longtime ally at the Graduate Center. So I'm so pleased to have been hovering under his voice and under his wing and in his presence for many, many years now. And I wanted to think with you today around three kind of questions that around Aquamarine. We can get to all three. If we do, that's okay. I think loosely they move around, I think, sight, sound, and the body, sort of loosely. But I wanted to start with a kind of maybe a little bit of a walk through what I was thinking as I was engaged in the opening, these two poems, in fact, and then go from there. So again, all one needs to know is around the bare knuckle writing here, the thundering intellect. I was looking at a review of of Camp Marmalade in the American Book Review, in which you called these units in the text syntactical units separated by what you call a crafty horizontal line. I'm really interested in the crafty horizontal line and the kind of symmetry, desymmetry, or desymmetric. I was taking notes as I was reading what happens between crush and theft, what happens when ignorance is ignited, when literature is laid out, and what is the claim to recollection within that mode, within these modes. I think about these two poems that you read together, or let's just say the two trances or meditations, the kind of movement between the two as open-ended frames. I'm interested in the ways in which the work form a natural kinship structure from line to line, from section to section, that I think revolves around color. I did say that I was going to talk about sight, and it's probably like, what do they say, ocular, too ocular of a move to say that. But let's just say color and sight, maybe, to combine those two phrases. And these lines, which you read, which occur in the first note, made a spontaneous mark with a leftover tube of auratic ultramarine. Fingers smeared it to create abrupt punctuating lines. I'm interested in what you're doing here with the kind of, as you say earlier earlier just before this passage, you say, or the speaker says, I remain uncertain about the function of suppositories. So I'll frame the question within this. I'm interested in color and the ways in which you're playing with sight as a kind of multi-dimensional practice. And I'm wondering if you can talk about what it means to both work in the syntax of a line, but also to craft the line between the two as a mode that moves between as many modalities as you might think of today. That's the first question.
Okay, that's great. I don't even know if I can answer it, but I can swim within some of the pools you've opened out. One of first, let's just call it the pool of gratitude for a reading that's spacious and attentive and fine-grained, which is unlike what I'm used to receiving. So like, I think if the process of writing this book is of exhalation and editing, but not of it landing and being received and noted. And what I'm happy hearing you speak is that the kinship system of local resemblances is being honored by your curiosity about how one word creeps into the other word. And I don't know if that's visual. It is happy, perhaps, but I would say I think in terms of the smearing, auratic, ultramarine mark, the according of the kinship system and an attention to nearness has to do maybe with that the fingers are already there in some sense, that we're already, the pastel, Sennelier oil pastel crayon is the ultramarine one is already making the mark and is already in a sense disintegrating and getting squished. And it's going to leave a lot of little extra, what the painter Amy Silman, the great painter Amy Silman once said long ago visiting my studio, boogers. Like the Sennelier paint thing is going to leave little kind of unwanted little boogers all over the page that you're going to have to do something with. And so the thing that you're going to do, because your finger is there, is rub them somewhere else. And that's how you end up, I think, with these adjacencies of sound in language. Because the thing that you're rubbing in language, you're rubbing memory. So you're saying, like suppositories lead me to whatever they led, Barbara leads me eventually to Liz and Dick. David Cassidy leads me to Renata Tebaldi. Things lead into each other, but in this book, I would just say I take a huge amount of liberty to enjoy the friendship of things smearing into each other that don't normally abut.
When you say friendship, I also hear a kind of friendship. actually the kind of constructed question I had to, speak, I wrote this question about, what are the kinds of smearifications that trespass, edge, and double within the milieu of the syntactical line, right? That was the kind of written question. But what I'm interested in now, as you're talking about writing, is one of the things, just to talk about our past, one of the things I loved about working with you as it was so many years ago as a graduate student, but it also feels so present, are the exercises that you asked us to think through, in which you would have us, what you called at that time, cross-wiring, say Foucault with, Saber Masoch or whomever, in this crazy way. But I remember getting your handwritten comments back, and I was thinking a lot about your writing and drawing, and that I wish I had I could model it here, right? This act of writing, for those of us who have hands and write, and all, and this act in rubbing, I think, and this part of the finger, and that movement is, I think, the smearification. And it's kind of the political question is, smear, or smear the queer, right? Which is both assault, as you say, the kinds of, I'm just looking at these claims, the crush and theft, or desire and equality, all these things that are so far and distant from one another. The second question, I think, I love what you're getting at in terms of, let me think about this more closely. The sound of writing in the thinking, but also the sound of writing and drawing, and the kind of trance state, or the kind of ultramarine haptic activity that leads one to the terrain of content in your work. And I was so interested because, the thing about this is, I'll read you some of my Google searches around these two poems. Andy Warhol, Blowjob, 1964. Blow Up, 1966, whom I didn't know this filmmaker or the actor David Hemmings, Michelangelo, and I'm assuming it's Antonini or Antonini. Antononi, from 1966. I'm sorry, yes, from 1966. I didn't know, but I love being able to kind of move in that way in the work, to do that kind of search. And it's interesting because I played the two films side by side, Blow Up and Blow Job. And I happen to think about not silence, but the kind of under amplification of the scrape of the wind against the trees, of the blowjob's register in the valence of the eyes, of the breeze or wind that comes out of the mouth. And that kind of not silence, but the sort of the unexplained noise is, I think, the arena of your work, so that the kinship structures and the fringe of friendship might be operating. So the question I had around that was, can you talk about what moves around sound in dimensions for you? The urgencies of sound, often in your work revealed in an interplay between, I think, body, object as in desire, but object of desire, but also in the resultant.
With sound, I think I'm thinking of just like predecessors or ways I hear sound. And when you're talking about fingers and physicality, and seeing my handwriting long ago and all that, I'm also thinking that for me, the difference between, I'm going to get back to the three writers, but the difference between the drafts of Ultramarine, I'm going to show you one.
Yes, please, that would be amazing.
This is the way they look. I mean, it's just a notebook. It's just like a moleskin notebook, and there's just like, I don't know if this is actually from one of the Ultramarine ones, but so it's just, I'm writing in a notebook, and they're not line breaks yet. I type it up, so the regime of smearing that happens with the hand in the notebooks is one of that, a kind of a license of the slanting hand, like sideways diagonal hand. When I type them up, another pleasure and rhythm, which is the percussiveness of typing, takes over. And it's at that point in the transcription of these notebooks that I was very literal about keeping intact whatever accidental line breaks happened at the end of the lines in the notebooks. Then the process of revision, those line breaks get changed, but they always remember the arbitrariness that they had when they weren't yet line breaks, but were just where the page ended. And so I guess that for me, the musical and physical sense that arose in the revision, which was the making of Ultramarine, because it was like 1,000 pages of transcripts of notebooks that I had to make into a poem, was remembering the slide of the whole thing, but really trying to get off on a prosody and a kind of palpable poetics having to do with percussiveness and minute strokes and displacements and shovings from line to line, and the horizontal lines create that so that there's a maximum degree of interruption. And I was saying the two writers, obviously Emily Dickinson and Gertrude Stein, that are for me behind Dickinson in terms of the brevity of her lines and the weird capitalization and the dashes and the sense of this is the hour of lead, what arrival at something 2 syllables later can mean. And Stein in the sense that she used so many monosyllabic words with such a sense of the slap and the punitive behind but also a happy pleasure in laying down the law of those syllables. That I would say, combined with the pleasure I got as a young person, like 18, reading Frank O'Hara for the first time and realizing that, you are gorgeous and I'm coming, that lines that don't have any percussiveness in them, that just go like talk. So I don't know. I mean, just want to say the final thing from that, Ronaldo, how much I love friendship and fringeship, which makes me think that the way you were looking for Antonio, you found Antonioni and Warhol together and you screened them. Is without wishing to be bossy and pedantic about the aims of my book, I do think of it like a kind of handbook to a certain fairy kingdom. I'm not saying this is a canon of my queer Jewish American taste or whatever I've been called in reviews, but that I do care about most things I mention. And I wouldn't mind if somebody looked up David Cassidy and Renata Tebaldi.
I so did.
I wouldn't mind it, and they just kind of stick them together and say, why on earth? Or maybe not why on earth, realize that you could put other things together.
Well, it's such a, okay, so this is what I'm thinking around the work. One of the reasons why or one of the many reasons why I'm compelled to, I work primarily, as you know, in Black aesthetics, right? Yeah. And what I'm energized in around Black aesthetics is its sort of queer valences that happen in that kind of haptic, the arena of both the manner of the poem, but also the terrain of the filmic that you're mining, but the space, right? So David Cassidy, the shape of David Cassidy's head, or singing voice, listening to those works together, that particular kind of whiteness, the kind of global presumption of its ease, the tenderness of it. And I think also thinking about, blow up and blow job next to one another, the arena in which a kind of landscape for me of an America is re-articulated within, what is it, the geographical history of America from Stein? I think I forget the title exactly, I'm terrible. But that text, but also the kind of capaciousness of the dynamics of gender, the dynamics of language, the dynamics of the kind of the question of where language breaks down, where race is urgent. So to me, I think about this in shadow works, right? I think about your very, very famous, essay in Cleavage, The Diary of a Black Suit, which was so transformative for me in terms of thinking of the possibilities of Blackness within this vector that allows for the space to lay it out that doesn't necessarily come from anywhere else, but what did you call it? The kind of fairy dream
Fairy, the
The fairy field.
Pansy Riot.
Now we're talking.
Yeah.
I think that zone, I think that's the question to me of blackness, which is also the question of visibility, which is also under these lines within in Egg Hunt or Egg Hat,
Yeah.
right? In Egg Hat in number 4, you know, there's a line, the 2 last lines of this are underbody to absorb intercourse leakage. I think to me serves as a way in which I guess I'm maybe kind of sparring a little bit here and really thinking about, not only am I really interested in the ways in which the poetic construction of the work is allowing for manner and possibility and intention, I'm also really interested in what happens when the writing practice also points to the writer's curiosity that lets in all of these fields of capaciousness that in turn let in all of the hopes and desires for those of us who are working at the fringes, whatever makes us, you know, queer or black or outside or disabled or enabled or energized or broken or sad. I mean, that's what I really appreciate about your work, because it allows for so many of us to hang on to the edge, but to also feel grounded within that center. And that, you know, you only get that experience in work that's this, it's the work of both poetry, but it's also the work of endurance art.
I love that. I love everything you're saying deeply, deeply. And I just want to say something about the towel, placing towel under body to absorb intercourse leakage, is the importance of that detail suddenly in terms of the themes you're bringing up in the practices and the fringe hopes, you know, resistances, has to do with, and this is back to sight, your first question, being, making oneself a person who knows and finds necessary to say the presence of the towel under the body to absorb intercourse leakage. Maybe also being the person who places the towel there, i.e. a careful person or a person who is interested in seeing what the leakage is going to look like. Maybe it's going to make an interesting painting. You know, I don't think that's what John Dielman is thinking of in the Chantal Akerman movie, but it's also, though, and this is where I feel the most deep kinship with your work, especially the new book of yours, Virgil Kills, which is coming out in a couple of months, I think, from Nightboat, a series of linked stories, which is essentially also a work of poetic imagination and an exploration of desire and prosody, that you too, Ronaldo, from the beginning of your work, from your very first books, were interested in, we're noticing things like the towel under the body to absorb intercourse leakage. And there is in that kind of writerly gesture there an obtuse and impertinent specificity and a concern both with filth or the things that should not be admitted into the poem, and kind of tidiness in some kind of a way. Like, I'm just thinking of the peregrinations of your various narrators in this recent work of yours, and how in My Prostate a shopping mall somehow, but also like use Robin Hood, you know, use desire as a Robin Hood strategy to steal back through smittenness my rightful property, which gets us in a way back to shopping malls. And I guess that we're both in our work people who seek a kind of poetic totality through a fringy noticing of maybe that towel that is the separation between having a clean and proper practice and having an improper one.
A willingness, I think, to get dirty, but a willingness to work with dirty things to make these clean constructions. A willingness, right? You know.
And I often have taught, or several times at least at the Graduate Center, have taught your book Farther Traveler. And there's, I think in that book, there is a prose poem or something where you're talking about like being at breakfast in a
Yeah.
hotel, like it's probably the MLA or the AWP or something, and you're at breakfast and you're noticing what a man is eating. Not not a man that many people would notice. And he's with his family, I think, and
Yeah.
you're noticing what he's, and you're kind of methodical about noticing it, and you're weaving it into a poetic manifesto. And I think it's that point of view shot in a way that we share, and that where we are uh, strangely on the fringes of the other table at the restaurant, uh, ogling and taking notes and using that aperture as a space for making marks toward a pretty totality-seeking manifesto of a poetic practice. Like, in other words, you looking at the other table at the maple syrup that guy is pouring on his pancakes, you're not doing that because you think it's specific and writers need to be specific. You're not doing it under the auspices of like good short story technique. You're doing it because you're writing a poetic statement. And I'm noticing the towel, the intercourse leakage towel, or really anything else. When I say start taking Pepto-Bismol for the sake of post-bop joy, it is, those sorts of details are in the service of thinking about how to put one's consciousness and one's predicament into sequential language on a page, and do it right, the way it really happens, and not fake it, not neaten it up so that it looks like a prearranged statement of how things should function. I mean, I guess it means like putting David Cassidy, really just putting David Cassidy in there.
I think that was maybe one of the, thank you for exploring the work so closely and moving around the concern, right? The concern of, under the towel, the kind of parallels, the thing is the syrup, right? Those things, the kind of weird wetness of a towel, but also the weird kind of, at one moment, they're both still. At one moment, they both mediate desire. They both protect. I wasn't going to go in this direction, but it makes me think about family. It makes me think about, because I know in Farther Traveler, as I think about that particular figure, part of the reason why the speaker or me, I was able to be so attentive was because in some ways I was writing about my father. I was writing about the kind of care that he would provide for us, for instance, as military brats, going to the ship for a meal, attending to a buffet, and how much that meant for us to be loved, and for some reason, all of the kind of critique of maybe being a writer or the kind of snarkiness that I may have had, I don't know, but as you're bringing it up right now, it makes me think about the dimensions of family. And I'm wondering about maybe if you could talk about the sort of, I mean, this happens. I was looking again at Humiliation, at the story, The Blob. And the speaker, you, is talking about your mother reading being, asked to read Black Boy. And I'll just can I read a little passage?
Yeah.
And then I'll bring it back, but this passage I thought was so beautiful. When I first read Black Boy, I did not consider myself a member of a sexual minority. However, I considered myself the inhabitant of a body that was strange to itself, uncomfortable with its form and appearance, and at once hypersensitive to nuances of sensation, palpation, temperature, texture, taste, and deadened to so much else within and without that body that I don't know how to begin even to give a name to this experience or deathliness within life. Or was I aware as a child that others around me were also dead to themselves, and thus dead, at least in discontinuous flickers of time, to others, to me? And I'm so sorry, Wayne, because I meant to have a page number for this notebook. One of the things I was noticing in your work was that where the kind of longer pieces happened and the things that were maybe over, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 3, 4, 5, 6, between 9 and 10 lines. I felt that was a moment in which you were working out something so familiar and embodied. So I'll read a line. Your lava produces lava in me. I want to tell intemperate vascular details, a blazon of your satyr characteristics, catalyzing flame, combustion and nutting, calling it snow. And that, I mean, I like black and white because I think black and white creates a template through which to really understand clarity here. And I think the kind of space between the nutted white snow and the child learning that Black boy is the insistent narrative that gets one to understand embodiment, combustion, catalyzing race. I'm wondering if that's happening between an even more familiar relationship that moves from the friendship to the familial. And maybe if you could talk about that, those sorts of intimacies, whether or not family or those kinds of, or even ancestral familial traditions are informing the work.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for reading that passage from Humiliation. I remember that moment in the book, but as you read the words, I didn't recognize them. I mean, in terms of like deadness, I thought those sound nice and philosophical. Is that a gomban or something? Like I didn't,
Right.
I didn't know. I honestly just didn't. I mean, maybe you wrote them and actually put them in there. But whatever. I thought you were gonna mention. I think I say earlier in that passage in Humiliation that my mother said read Blackboard because I had this was in 8th grade, and this is true. I think the teacher, we had to do a book report, and I chose the novelization of the movie See No Evil. And my mother wisely said, that's a novelization, not a book. You can't give a book report on a novelization, least of all this like Mia Farrow movie or whatever. So she said, read Black Boy. And that was, good teaching, I think, on my mother's part. And I'm grateful for that. So in terms of family and, family is a huge part of all my work. And I think that in Ultramarine, particularly with a lot of like German language that comes up in it, as well as French and Italian, but mostly German. And even that line at the beginning that I said, reclaim German citizenship. It's just something I've returned to all my life in my work, is this sense of my father being from Germany and a refugee from Nazi Germany, and what it means, not in terms of the specific stories I could tell you, but in terms of an overall relation to language, to structures, to diligence, to speaking versus silence. I mean, just the kind of basic operations of an intelligence and a body in the world. And an ultramarine, without consciously meaning to do it, an ultramarine for me in paintings, ultramarine, the paint, ultramarine, which is, I use this flash vinyl paint, ultramarine, is so beautiful that I use it anytime, any chance I can get. And my first recourse, just approaching a blank canvas, is to just put ultramarine on it. Then other stuff. So ultramarine to me is the understructure of things. It's whether that's the ocean or whatever. And so ultramarine, I won't say ultramarine is, Eastern Europe and the Jewish diaspora or anything like it. Isn't quite that conscious or literal a thing, but like we all have backwardsness to traverse in our life. And we all have to be thinking not about just our personal DNA and our personal trajectories of who we embodied, who we are, but what has been going on this planet for these centuries. And that means thinking backward in complicated ways. And you think backward, if you're like me, who deals with my own consciousness, you think backward through the materials you have. And language is the material I have. And the structures of inheritance and everything diasporic, essentially, that are in my language are a thing that I inevitably explore without doing it thematically, which I just am not, as not a memoirist It's not like a search for background. And it's been occurring to me reading this, my own, like proofreading Ultramarine 1,000 times, that it's Paul Celan and Gertrude Stein coming together for me. That is the weird things I do in this book that make it in some ways a difficult book and not a memoir, not an argument, are that I'm doing the Gertrude Stein thing, which is rhythmic language as sensual experience. And I'm doing the Paul Celan thing, if that's not sacrilege to say, by tearing apart words under the pressure of histories. In this case, the most severe history is not being my own. But so it's, and you know, and that Stein and Celan were alive in Paris together, or were they? No, but Celan lived in Stein's city, and they were both really asking questions of what language can do around war. You know, so I guess I don't know how that answers the.
It does answer
that's
it.
somewhere.
I mean, I think it addresses it beautifully, because I think I've been thinking a lot about, you know, about Eve Sedgwick's sort of thinking around performativity and the neighborhood of the performance and the ways in which your work is, you know, I'm thinking of ways to, let's just say, not to ruin our lives here, but to kind of resist the futurist tendency, you know, Afrofuturism or this futurism or that, you know, it's like, I don't get the kind of rallying call behind that shift, when I think what you're talking about is the return is something that maybe, again, to sort of have both and, right? I can't dismiss, you know, so much of that, but I think for me, I'm comforted, or I feel much more alive around the looking backwards that understands that the draft and its kind of capacious horizontal habituations are also the things that are, you know, important to have against the percussiveness of the type of typing. Now I'm going to read a little bit from the last, from 45 again, which I think speaks to what you're talking about, Celan and Stein, and the kind of the sort of the kind of cityfication of those two. Nothing. This is on page 431 or so. It says, "We cling to the recollection without valuing it," which again I think speaks to this notion of where argument, you know, is jettisoned. And I love this because I have, I don't know if you know this, but I have a German aunt. My father's African American, and his brother married a German woman. My mother and my uncle, my father and uncle married Filipino women. And so I have this, you know, German aunt, Ursula, who would just bring rum balls every like.
Really?
Yeah, it was like, those were my favorite things. So I was all about your rum balls, and I'm all about them. I grew up with them with a little powder on them. She would come, just cases, I mean, tins of them. So nothing returns to us now but the rumor of the fight and the rum balls hovering on the precipice between deliciousness and inedibility. And I just love that because of its sort of stark recognition of what happens when we imagine kinship structures that are rooted through writerly relationships, food desires, i.e. syrup, towel, rum, balls, all of that thing. I also love the simple play between rum ball and rumble. You know, I love the kind of doubling of that and the ways in which that fight is also to rumble and to rumball, is that sparring is okay. And I think that kind of sparring in the moment that passes, that relies on training from the past, that has no other future outcome but a win, honey, or a loss.
I love that. I love that. And I just noticed for the first time tonight when I was reading this passage, I've never read this one out loud, that the movement into rum balls happens sonically because I'm talking about the all, A-L-L,
Yeah.
where I say mind performing as record needle, resuscitating the all, A-L-L. And I was thinking when I wrote that about theories of totality and perhaps a kind of authoritarian notions or an authoritarian drive toward totalization, as opposed to maybe what Stein and Celan and other certain kinds of massive literary or artistic figures are doing by creating a whole way of seeing and being. And the fact that rum balls comes as a kind of sonic echo of the all seems to
Yes.
me, like in terms of fringes and kinship, that the spillover from a project of the all that I hold at arm's length, not only because of my own limitations as a human being, but also fear of the danger of projects that look for the all. But that I
Yeah.
slide from that into rum balls, which is more family, more local, more towel to absorb intercourse leakage, more shopping mall.
It's also shaped, it's a sculpted food.
Yep.
And I think that that if we had more time, the next sort of set of questions, if I actually want to read this, is to think about the kind of the sculptural
Yeah.
in your work, and the sculptural in your painting, and the sculptural in your work, so that the AWL and
Yes.
the tools, right, the all and the owl, and the kind of the sort of that rendering into a place that is, I think, a very different kind of, let's just say, a gestural futurism, which I would say.
That. I love that.
It's so beautiful, Wayne. I think your work is mining in that way, and I think that that's sort of even the thickness of this book, the deception of its thickness and its very delicate center, but its heaviness is very sculptural. I think in terms of its its ability to kind of reveal weight, but to be made of very delicate lines.
And
It's
for
very
that, I want to just a shout out to Nightboat again, maybe as we
Yeah, they
move to
kill it.
questions. And that Nightboat, which was going to publish your magnificent Virgil Kills, it believed in this project enough to do this. The sculpture comes from Nightboat. The fact that Nightboat, a nonprofit, believes in unruly poetry enough to sponsor a trilogy like this, and also a design. This is designed by Jeff Clark, all 3 books, and sponsor an envisioning of a work of poetry as a kind of art object, and make it an art object. So I really encourage everyone to, if they don't already, to place a pre-order for Virgil Kills from Nightboat, which is really like, it's the all. If you're Ronaldo, your work has always cruised the all.
I learned from
I
the
think,
best.
isn't there like probably a gay bar called the All, AWL?
We should open it, actually.
Okay, consider it opened. Consider it.
Exactly, tonight.
So now I think we should take questions.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good.
So don't have any just yet, but I've been encouraging everyone. Come on, folks.
People, I mean, we could still talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead. Then I'll call them.
Yeah, I mean, what is interesting, Ronaldo, in terms of like our multimedia practice, is that I am now doing various kinds of musical and video performances based on parts of Ultramarine, where I do a kind of Sprechstimme, improvised song speech recitation with piano. 2 sections of these, and some of them, they're on my Instagram, you can see them, but I'm also doing some of them live. I'm going to be doing them at the Hammer Museum in April, a whole bunch of them. But I think before I started doing that practically, when I visited Santa Cruz a few years ago, and I insisted that they get a little piano for me, or a keyboard, so I could do that. You talked a lot then about your tape recording practice, and since then you've moved even more wholeheartedly into art making or something. So I just wanted to say that we have this between us, this very interesting tropism outward from the page into a sense of it as a space for dance and song, and but it's also because we want to enact the process that got us to that page by bringing it back into motion. That's the way I see it, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, I don't necessarily think I would have a performance practice if it wasn't so both centrally and adjacently. um, I don't like that term of given permission, right? I think that's a weird way of let's say maybe just given space, right? Given space to move in that direction as a student in, at all facets of my life, right? I mean, I think my studying with you allowed me to even read in performance, to engage. I think some of the first pieces that I gave you, they were just enacting these strange encounters, walking around in Brooklyn, looking at signs. And I think the celebration of that allowed me to be aware of my own body, thinking in space enough to know that the writing of the kind of writing of the performance of seeing created a radical, break between me as a writer and then the subject of the persona, which was an actor. Yeah. And so I think that certainly, informed my work. I have in addition to Virgil Kills, as a kind of sister book, is this book called Carmelina Figures, which is a book of drawings and performance works from the last, maybe since 2013 or 12 or something like that. Just a number of these interventions. And I find them to be really important. Here's some questions. Wade.
Okay, Frank, during the
Yes.
wonderful conversation, you both mentioned issues of friendship and familiality, sociality. How do you find yourself working, writing with these conceptions, practices around being together? How do friends, each of your friends, find their way into your work? Well, I try not to, in terms of like, I will answer that, and Ronaldo, you maybe want to answer it as well. I try not to write about people I know directly, but first of all, everyone who has been my student and people I know, fellow artists, some of you are here right now. I have, I hope not vampiric, but a grateful, hungry relation to the practices and aesthetic desires of the people that surround me as students and as friends and as my own mentors. And so that I am, aside from the issue of whether they appear as people in my work, watching other people go at it, being in other people's studios, feeling the energy, feeling, in Ronaldo, in your work specifically, feeling your hunger to incorporate the fringe of your professional activities and even your professional activities themselves into the work that then in some way is part of the professional legitimation, but is questioning the logic of professionalization at the same time. And that's a very fascinating transformation machine. And I think I am an academic, as are you, but I think that these books represent a kind of, in terms of like seizing the all, they're like my most intellectual performance, but they're certainly not, thinking in argument.
I would agree with you in terms of like maybe the vampiric is also like for me, I think I'm interested in I mean, I guess let me just backtrack just a little bit or move backwards a little bit around that. The kind of act of the unconscious, like the ways of mining dream space, for instance. So the getting at it works in as you're talking about it, there's the kind of the space of the classroom and the space of that kind of camaraderie. For me, I'm also interested in, I believe in dreams. And, often when I haven't worked for, as soon as I stop working, suddenly I'm at a giant retreat with all of my Black writer friends and they just show up. I'm suddenly there. Or for instance, if I'm cruising or if I'm out or if I'm writing, there's the voice in Wayne's voice comes into my head. And these voices that come into my head as I'm working, even the tone, as hearing you tonight, I realized that to me was a first sound, the kind of primaries. Hearing you read early in my career is such an indelible, leaves such an indelible vibration in my body and allows me to move on in a way. So I think that's what I think I can add to the discussion in that way, that the friendship structures come in unconscious ways and they guide in ways that actually keep us, I think, happy in the profession, you know, and making work. I think it's important.
Because there's another question here. For Wayne, a wonderful tweeter. Do you see social sculpture and thread smearing as a latent psychological bloom that could cure the world if facilitated like a gardener with gasoline for opening up heroically, leaking on honest madness? Well, that's very poetic and has beautiful fringe spill in it, just as a question. I'm certainly for myself would never, Twitter, there is something very cool about the way that tweets look like the pages of Ultramarine. I mean, there is something really cool that people are noticing, that words grouped together in a little box like that have a kind of magic. I don't know. I would say that if there's listening is really important, listening and receiving, and that what you have done throughout tonight, but particularly also at the beginning when you talked, everything that you've done about like listening closely to what my words are doing to you and what their resonances and connotations are, has less to do with the thread smearing of the social sculpture and much more to do with a kind of vow or a compact that comes in some sense from solitude as well as kinship, where you are choosing to pay fervent, maybe prurient, curious, prying attention to what blooms from a single word. And, like, just slow down around it.
It's necessary, I think, in your work. I mean, looking at this language, to go back to see the language of it's such a great divide between the gardener and the gasoline. That kind of the space between how do you build a psychic structure in language that realizes that we all need just something to, rock climbing is real. That there's a kind of a tendency in first world culture to want to rock climb, to create that activity. There are a few animals that do that, but I just think it's really interesting to think about your poetry, to think about Ultramarine as, in some ways, it makes me think about its kind of amphibiousness, and its temperature as a work, and that, specifically thinking about the ways in which it's moving from the journal, and you're working this way, or I'm not sure how you're working in the studio, but I'm thinking about the ways in which your own body and your embodiment is keeping you climbing, but not aspirationally.
No, definitely not.
Never aspirationally, I think, but certainly to receive the power and warmth of the sun.
But what I love that, and I love what you said about the future, and just like enough with futurism and enough with, I mean, the whole question of the future these days is vexed and catastrophic and tragic, but and that the gestures of trying to harvest the all and hug it and make it sit still do not come from futurism, but from gleaning and from noticing, I think, noticing the intersections that have already happened to some extent, noticing what has already been a budding, and what kinds of coincidences and nearnesses have already, I don't know, I don't want to get too corny and totalizing at the end of our talk, but there is something about what I see, for example, in Virgil Kills, which is, it's billed as a book of stories, but I'd say it's poetry by other means, because it's essentially, it's not going forward. It's not going forward, it's going within, and it's settling down with certain nuances that are abiding and maybe rancorous and difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that was something, yes, that's something that I know that I keep thinking about the moment in which I forget what I was working on with you at some point. And I say these things, you know, because I think they're important to know, because I remember you in a workshop saying, I forget what I was trying to work. And you said something to us, all of us as students, is to pay attention, you know, to pay attention to the thing we see, and that kind of reporting of what we see is valuable as a form. I mean, it's important to note that that was a long ago. That was for me almost probably close to 20, you know, almost 20 years ago. But that moment of recognizing that kind of looking and holding, I think is important, because the unusual accident, we don't even know. Like, I'm thinking about David Cassidy, but I'm also thinking about Prince. I'm also thinking now about, you know, what my mother's digging up in the yard, the shapes of the soil in her yard, that, you know, the field of my mother's, you know, mourning ground, and the sort of topology in your work that exists outside of the poem. That abutment,
Yeah.
I think, is it's to me the future, because it's what can move us forward into, you know, into psychic psychic leakage with one another.
Okay, Ronaldo, I think I'm gonna say goodbye to all this. I think we should wrap up. I have that feeling, because I see that people are leaving and saying goodbye, many thanks. So I think we should catch us, you know, end it while we're at our height. Ronaldo, I want to come to Santa Cruz and visit you, and I want you to come here to New York and visit me, and we will continue this, not for everyone, not with everybody listening, but we'll return in public another time soon.
Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you, Ronaldo, so much.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone, for coming. Thank you.
Thank you, City Lights.
Bye, City Lights. Bye, y'all.